The story begins on a stormy night. Rain pours down as a man kneels on the ground, his hand pressed against the wet earth. A woman stands before him, a sword buried deep in his chest. He tells her to end it, to twist the blade if she truly wants him gone. Their eyes meet for a moment before she tightens her grip and turns the sword. Blood spills from his mouth, but he doesn't resist. Instead, he lifts his trembling hand, a faint smile on his lips. He murmurs something about how distant and untouchable she has always been. As his strength fades, his hand falls away, leaving a blood-stained mark on her cheek. She takes a step back, watching as life leaves his body. His final words are bitter, cursing her as he dies. A glowing message suddenly appears. Engagement breaking. Complete. The requirement for this outcome? The death of Desalane von Greyhound Uklein. The scene shifts to a different setting. A man watching the screen lets out a relieved sigh, mumbling about how long it took to fix that annoying bug. The status window confirms it. No more glitches. The game is finally running as intended. This is Kim Woo-jin, a game developer working at Rue, a company that seemingly came out of nowhere but quickly became famous for its high-quality games. In the struggling console game market of Korea, Rue's rapid success surprised everyone. Their latest project is their most ambitious yet. A massive title with an evolving story where player choices shape the world and difficulty. The game's appeal lies in its deep narrative and intelligent AI characters, making even a single-player experience feel dynamic. Players can take on various roles, king, noble, devil hunter, and more, allowing for limitless possibilities. If this game succeeds, the company will thrive, but failure means ruin. Woo-jin has spent months fixing bugs, but the biggest headache was always the same character, Desalane. As a mid-boss and a key antagonist, his story roots were complex, filled with countless variables that caused endless glitches. Tonight, after all his struggles, Woo-jin finally managed to get through the engagement-breaking route without any issues. Desalane's fate was sealed, killed by his own fiancée, a fitting end considering the chaos he caused throughout the episode. Just as he takes a moment to relax, a voice calls out to him. A woman approaches, asking about the test results. This is Yuara, his team leader, and his ex-girlfriend. They were together for 7 years, sharing both good and difficult times. She was ambitious, always striving for improvement, while he preferred a laid-back approach to life. Her determination helped him land this job, pushing him to be better. But in the end, their differences pulled them apart. She tells him she heard about the trouble he had with the bugs and is glad he managed to push through. Woo-jin simply nods, feeling the exhaustion settle in after another long night of work. Woo-jin reflects on the fact that it's been 6 months since his breakup with Yue-ra. He's heard rumors that she's seeing someone new, and judging by how things seem, it looks like the relationship is going well. When he casually brings it up, she seems a little surprised but acknowledges that word travels fast in the company. She confirms the rumor and says things are fine. Woo-jin, feeling a little frustrated, comments on it before sarcastically wishing her success in taking things to the next level. She brushes him off, telling him to stop being petty and focus on work. Switching the topic, she mentions that the writer has made more changes, requiring adjustments to some character models. Woo-jin sighs. New changes happen almost every day. Speaking of characters, he wonders if Desalane is really just a mid-boss, considering that lucky players can take him down early in the game. Yuara explains that Desalane's strength grows as the story progresses, making the game harder depending on player choices. That unpredictability is part of the game's appeal. Then, she casually points out something unexpected. Desalane's character design is actually based on Woo-jin himself. He's confused, but she laughs, saying it should have been obvious while working on the model. After all, they both have the same over-the-top appearance. Woo-jin insists that he barely interacted with the writer, so there's no way that's true. Yue-ra teases him, saying that's why she always makes sure to kill Desalane first when she plays. He jokingly asks if she's picking a fight, but she continues, saying their personalities are also similar. Woo-jin refuses to believe he has anything in common with someone whose last words are an insult. Shifting back to work, Yue-ra asks for his thoughts on the playtest. Woo-jin admits the game is fun but worries about the company's future relying entirely on its success. She reassures him, reminding him that the gameplay trailer has already generated worldwide excitement. There's no way it will flop. Just then, Woojin notices something and points it out to her. Her boyfriend is waiting nearby. She seems surprised, thinking it's too late for that, but sure enough, a man stands next to his car, checking his phone. Woojin tells her she shouldn't keep him waiting and urges her to go. She agrees, says goodbye, and leaves. Woojin watches her go, feeling a mix of emotions before turning his attention back to work. As he resumes checking Dekalane's profile, Woojin rereads the character's traits and questions how the writer could have possibly based them on him. Dekalane was once praised as a genius in magic, but in reality he was just average. His noble upbringing and inflated pride turned him into an unbearable person, making him universally hated despite his growing strength throughout the story. Woojin starts considering whether he should tweak the character's traits. Since Dekalane is supposedly modeled after him, maybe he should add some qualities that make him more sympathetic. He adds things like understanding to soften his personality. Then he gets carried away, adding more skills: wealthy magnate, Midas touch, sharp eyesight, and iron body. Only after he's done does he realize he went overboard. He had planned to make small changes, but instead he added an entire list of enhancements. Realizing he needs to undo the modifications before anyone notices, he quickly moves to restore Dekalane to his original state. Before he can fix it, a sudden notification startles him. Someone is messaging him this late at night. Checking his screen, he sees that it's developer Rain, the scriptwriter. They ask if he's still working, and Woojin replies that he is. Assuming it's about another model update, he tells them to just say the word and he'll take care of it immediately. Rain clarifies that they aren't here for any particular reason, just to watch. Woojin doesn't understand what they mean, wondering if they plan to check for bugs together. Before he can ask more, a sudden window appears, making Rain laugh. Confused, Woojin questions what there is to see, but then he notices something strange. A massive hole has opened in the sky, surrounded by swirling lightning. As the lightning intensifies, flashing violently, Woojin is caught off guard. He struggles to comprehend what's happening and why such a phenomenon exists in the first place. Before he can react, a powerful bolt strikes down, hitting him directly. Pain, unlike anything he's ever felt, spreads through his body as his consciousness begins to fade. In his final moments, he wonders where he is and who the vague figures he's seeing might be. A voice echoes in the darkness, warning someone to always be on guard. The speaker insists that Dekalane is not an easy man to kill. Though he may seem weak now, he could rise again at any moment. He is a villain through and through, one who always finds a way to balance his own abilities. The next thing Woojin hears is a sharp voice yelling at him to wake up. Someone is demanding that Dekalane get up immediately. When he finally opens his eyes, a woman is standing over him, scolding him for lying around and calling himself human. Woojin, still disoriented, takes a moment to process his situation. It has been a few days since he found himself in this body, yet it still feels surreal. The woman, clearly frustrated, demands to know how much longer he plans to isolate himself over a single woman. She accuses him of tarnishing their family's reputation. She tosses some papers onto the floor, warning him that if he doesn't want to lose the professor position he values so much, he needs to start working. Woojin, now coming to terms with his reality, recalls the bizarre event that happened just a week ago. The night sky had undergone a strange transformation, and when he woke up, he was in an unfamiliar place, inhabiting an unfamiliar body. Everything around him feels oddly familiar, confirming his growing suspicion he has somehow ended up inside the very game he was developing. And worse, he isn't just any character. He has become Dekalane, a villain doomed to die no matter which path the story takes. Lying in bed, Woojin. Now Dekalane looks completely drained. At first, he believed this was all just a dream. But as days passed, the undeniable sensation of being alive forced him to accept this as reality. Maybe this is the afterlife, a twisted continuation after his death from that lightning strike. One thing, however, is absolutely certain. He is now the villain of the unfinished game, he spent countless hours working on, and his fate is sealed. Decalane is an enemy to nearly everyone in this world, the catalyst for many major events, and a character designed to die. Out of all the possible bodies he could have ended up in, why did it have to be this one? The biggest problem is that he has no idea what stage of the story he has entered. His only clue is the amount of mana he possesses, but without knowing how to use it, he is completely powerless. Worse still, he knows from experience that Decalane's survival rate is practically non-existent. During development, the team tested every possible route over 1,000 times, and Decalane survived in only one scenario. Looking over the papers the woman left behind, he sees a document mentioning the Imperial University and his role as a senior professor. The woman, he realizes, is Euclian, his half-sister. She is the true authority of the Euclian family, overseeing everything in his absence. Their relationship is strained at best. There is also a mention of another name, Uli. Woojin, now fully aware of his situation, suspects there is something deeper happening between Decalane and Uli, though he isn't sure what it is yet. Uriel left in frustration, dropping a stack of documents before storming out. She made it clear, if he wanted to keep his position as a professor, he had to start working. Today happened to be the day of the lecture, and Decalane sighed, realizing he had no choice but to go. He had never given a lecture in his life, but he needed to gather as much information as possible. More importantly, a status window had appeared, listing survival objectives. His primary goal was to become essential to the game, and his first side quest, giving the university lecture, would reward him with 0.5 store credit. It wasn't much, but even that was valuable, and he knew he couldn't afford to ignore it. Uriel was one of the many variables that could lead to his downfall, so playing along was his best option. Fortunately, he wasn't too concerned about the lecture itself. This body had a special trait, the ability to understand anything as long as he used mana. When designing Decalane's character, he had given him this ability to make him somewhat redeemable. Since this trait only appeared in the later stages of the game, it likely had hidden potential. Looking around his massive bedroom, he took in the luxurious surroundings. The bathroom and clothes felt unfamiliar, yet he could use them with ease. It was almost as if he had always lived as Decalane. His former self would have found the noble attire over the top, but now it felt elegant and comfortable. This shift was due to the body's innate traits: intimidation, dignity, and aesthetic sense. Everything seemed to be reinforcing the fact that this was his new identity. He realized he couldn't go against the habits ingrained in this body. Even things that would have felt unnatural to him before now came effortlessly. Attending his first lecture, though just a means to gather information, felt oddly normal. He was a noble, highly regarded, and influential, yet deep down, he still felt a lingering pressure, because at his core, he was still Woojin. Taking a moment to assess himself, he noted that his new body was objectively tall and handsome. In Aura's words, he was nothing more than a lazy and boring man, and he made sure to remind himself of that fact. Holding on to his true identity would keep him from becoming too complacent. Riding in the expensive car only emphasized how different this world was from his own. He had never even sat in a vehicle this luxurious before. The sheer cost of it made him think of the man he had seen with Aura, which irritated him slightly. As he sat in the car, he noticed another passenger, a young individual whose gender he couldn't immediately determine. They greeted him politely and handed over some papers. He assumed they were his secretary or assistant and wondered if they were a mage. The person reminded him that they had been under his guidance for 3 years. He quickly covered up his confusion by joking about it. Expecting lecture materials, he flipped through the documents, only to find a fully written script for the lecture. The entire lesson was pre-written, from start to finish. It made sense. Decalane was too arrogant and unmotivated to prepare a real lecture himself, so someone else had done the work for him. He thought about praising them for their effort, but just as he was about to speak, something briefly distorted. Instead of his usual dismissive remark, he ended up saying, "Good work." The sudden shift caught his assistant off guard. Even the driver seemed surprised that he was offering praise. A strange discomfort settled in Decalane's stomach, an uneasy knot tightening with each passing moment. He couldn't understand why something as simple as giving praise unsettled him so much. The feeling had started back at the mansion, but now it was even stronger, almost as if his thoughts were being influenced by Decalane's personality. As soon as the car stopped, he stepped out, taking in the grand sight before him. This was Imperial University, his new workplace. The sheer scale and prestige of the institution were undeniable. It was impressive, to say the least. With a clear destination in mind, he made his way to the Rodeo Hall, the lecture venue he had been assigned. Along the way, he overheard students buzzing with excitement. They spoke about how they were finally getting to attend one of his lectures, calling him a prodigy and a genius in spell interpretation. Once inside, he wasted no time, setting his papers down and preparing to start the lesson. As expected, some of the students were mesmerized by his presence, openly admiring his looks, but not everyone was impressed. One girl in particular radiated hostility. She seemed almost disgusted, as if this moment had been long overdue. Her hatred ran deep. She remembered everything, how 3 years ago, her father had spent his life researching spell interpretation, only to have his work stolen. The shock and betrayal had driven him to take his own life. The thief behind it all was now standing right in front of her, celebrated as a genius, basking in undeserved glory. Her father's death had destroyed everything. Their noble status was gone, their house and lands taken away. She had been left with nothing but anger and a vow for revenge. That day, she swore to take everything back, to expose him and ruin him, just as he had ruined her family. But revenge required patience. She knew she couldn't act recklessly. If she wanted to destroy him completely, she needed a perfect plan. Meanwhile, Decalane carried on with the lecture, introducing himself again. He explained that, as a monarch-ranked mage, he had the ability to rule over elements, and he had been assigned as a special lecturer at the university. He briefly covered mage ranking systems before moving on to the fundamentals of magic. Magic, he explained, was divided into 3 main properties and 9 categories. The properties included origin, the foundation of magic, elements, the physical components, and material, which served as the medium. As for categories, there were disciplines such as summoning, destruction, and support. He continued listing them, but even he started tuning himself out. Despite his lack of real knowledge, the lecture was going surprisingly well. It was his first time teaching, yet everything flowed smoothly. Though he was simply reading from a pre-prepared script, his perfect comprehension made it seem effortless. His traits, intimidation and dignity, kept the students completely focused, while his elitism trait prevented him from feeling any pressure. In fact, it all felt natural, as if this role was meant for him. He then shifted the discussion to mana, explaining how its usage varied depending on where it was stored in the body. Mages typically kept their mana in their brains, making it easier to visualize spells, while knights stored theirs in their hearts, allowing energy to circulate through their bodies efficiently. The Dantian served as the most versatile storage for mana, seamlessly connecting internal energy with external forces. The idea was simple. Hard work mattered, but talent alone wasn't enough. Careful focus and selection were just as important. Even for Decalane, this advice was relevant. In reality, he wasn't exceptionally gifted. His mana pool sat at 3,300, yet there were others with over 300. 0. If anyone needed to listen to these words, it was him. But in the end, it was just a script, and he knew it. Wrapping up the lecture, he hesitated on the final section. This part felt off, something the real Decalane wouldn't have said. He debated whether to read it, but ultimately asked if anyone had questions. It was out of character for Decalane, but no one spoke up. Just as he was about to leave, a voice cut through the silence. A student announced that a mysterious spell had appeared in the mage dormitory the night before. Some were even calling it the work of a devil. As the so-called genius of spell interpretation, she demanded to know his thoughts. Instead of answering immediately, Decalane questioned her affiliation with the Mage Tower. She seemed caught off guard, asking why that mattered. He simply pointed out that proper protocol required her to announce her rank before speaking. Without basic manners, he wouldn't accept her question. The remark stunned her, but before she could argue, he dismissed the topic. His mind shifted to something more pressing, his dwindling mana. Just analyzing the lecture had drained 1,300 points, leaving him with only 2,000 out of 3,300. Who knew how much more would be needed to interpret an unknown spell? Laughter spread among the students at the girl's expense. They mocked her failed attempt to stand out. But she wasn't done yet. With a determined expression, she stepped forward, green energy forming around her hands. If the Mage Tower refused to interpret the spell, she would force him to do it. She formally requested an analysis, raising the magic circle into the air. Decalen focused, his mana steadily draining as he examined the spell. Meanwhile, she explained that lower-ranked mages had tried to decipher it all night, but made no progress. She just wanted a hint, anything that could help. But he didn't hesitate. It was barrier magic. The revelation shocked her. He clarified that it belonged to the enchantment category, meant to trap someone inside. No hint was necessary. It was obvious. She stood frozen, unable to process the response. At the same time, a notification appeared, confirming that he had completed a side quest and earned store currency. Later, in the Mage Tower's cafeteria, the same girl was shoving food into her mouth, frustration written all over her face. She cursed him under her breath. Her plan had backfired completely. She had tried to expose his fraudulent knowledge only for him to humiliate her instead. All because she forgot to say her name. The embarrassment was unbearable. But something didn't add up. In his flustered attempt to brush her off, he had classified the spell as enchantment magic. That category usually required a medium. Yet, the magic circle she had shown him was an exact copy of the one found at the dormitory, and it had no medium. How could it be enchantment magic? Her thoughts were interrupted when another student called her name. Aferin. The girl excitedly revealed that after reformulating the spell, they confirmed it was indeed a barrier. Confused, Aferin listened as the girl explained how impressed everyone was by her boldness. Most students had been too intimidated to ask questions, but Aferin had stood her ground. The realization hit hard. Was he right all along? Her stomach sank as her friend thanked her, saying their research report would include her name. Aferin weakly responded, insisting it must have been a lucky guess, but deep down, she knew her plan had backfired, and instead of exposing him, she had only raised his reputation. She reached into her bag and pulled out an advanced textbook, Understanding Elemental Magic, the subject Decalen taught. If she wanted to take him down, she had to know her enemy. There was no turning back now. Meanwhile, Decalen walked down the hallway, relieved that everything hadn't gone horribly wrong. When he looked at the spell earlier, his ability to understand magic activated on its own. Just seeing the complex pattern of lines in the spell drained all of his remaining mana. Despite his efforts, he couldn't grasp its meaning. Even if he had twice the mana, it still wouldn't have been enough to comprehend its principles. At least, nothing serious happened as a result. A voice calls out to him, and he turns to see a woman approaching. This is Yuli, a familiar face to him. She has snow-white hair and clear eyes, a person he has seen countless times before. She greets him and questions how he has been. Yuli is his fiancée, a well-known character who is destined to become a legendary knight. She mentions a promise he made to her a week ago, but he has no idea what she means. Playing along, he pretends not to remember. As he tries to walk past her, she stops him, reminding him of his past actions. The promise was simple. If he admitted his arrogance and deception to the world, she would stand by his side no matter what happened. But since he failed to keep his word, she tells him that he may leave. Though he hesitates for a moment, he ultimately walks away without a response. Yuli watches him leave, frustrated and angry. Their engagement was arranged for political reasons, meant to unite two powerful families, she accepted it as a duty, even without love. However, when it became clear that his so-called talents were a lie, both families remained silent to avoid scandal. But she could not tolerate deception. As a knight, she values honesty above all else. She had once felt hopeful when he agreed to confess the truth, but now she realizes he has no intention of keeping his promise. Her frustration grows as she reflects on his betrayal. The scene shifts to the Magic Tower. He explains that the Imperial University is the most prestigious institution in this world, and its magic department is the best of all. It is comparable to the top universities in his previous life, with the Magic Tower acting like an elite research facility. As he walks through the campus, he admires its vast size and well-maintained gardens. The familiar design reminds him of the time he and his team spent crafting this world. However, experiencing it firsthand in another person's body is not what he expected. Suddenly, he hears hurried footsteps behind him and instinctively reacts, elbowing the person rushing toward him. The boy stumbles, dropping everything he was carrying. Apologizing, the boy explains that he was in a hurry to meet his professor. Recognizing the student, he makes a small joke, but the boy doesn't understand it. Introducing himself as Alan, the student explains the reason for his urgency. Later, in Decalane's office, Alan presents a document, this year's sponsorship list for new mages. Decalane compares the Magic Tower to real-world research institutions, where funding is essential for progress. Professors sponsor promising new mages, selecting those they believe have potential. While reviewing the sponsorship list, one name stands out to him. The golden glow around it hints at his own attribute: wealthy magnate. His ability, described as an exceptional talent for finance and an instinct for valuable opportunities, allows him to visually perceive attributes related to wealth and potential. He assumes that the person behind this glowing name will generate significant financial benefits. There are several others with similar markings, but the brightest among them belongs to Aferin Luna. Aferin is a key character in the game, and according to its lore, she lost her father to Decalane. However, she has received no sponsorships. When Decalane asks Alan about it, the response is simple. Everyone fears getting involved. No one wants to risk the consequences of supporting her. Despite this, Aferin is highly skilled, having gained entry to the Magic Tower without attending the academy. She is his enemy, or rather, he is hers. If events unfold as they did in the game, she will eventually be the one to end his life. In every scenario, Decalane meets his demise in countless ways. This is due to a trait shared by all villains: villain's fate. The world itself conspires to bring about his downfall. He has been killed by swords, magic, poison, and even large-scale attacks. No matter the method, his fate remains unchanged. If he wants to survive, he must make a different choice, one that the original Decalane never would have considered. He quickly finalizes his decisions, signing documents and handing them to Alan for submission. Before leaving, Alan reminds him to borrow books, which he plans to read before heading home. Left alone in his office, Decalane contemplates his situation. To stay alive, he needs a vast amount of money. Many of the death scenarios in the game can be avoided with enough financial resources. Sponsoring a mage is a step in the right direction, but it isn't enough. Numerous named characters in this world despise him, and they will seize any opportunity to eliminate him. The only way to counter this threat is to become so powerful that they can no longer oppose him. However, achieving strength is not simple. His natural talent is only average, and at his current level he cannot withstand future challenges. To change his fate, he must be fully prepared. He does have one advantage: his attributes. Decalane cannot wield all four elements as he claims, but he does have talent in manipulating earth and fire. By combining earth, fire, and metal, he gains access to another ability, minus touch. This skill consumes mana to unlock hidden potential in a target. Additionally, his connection to metal allows him to use the Flying Mind Sword. Despite its grand name, the Flying Mind Sword is just telekinesis. However, this ability is not commonly used in this world. To make up for his lack of raw power, he turns to the study of manipulation magic. Mastering this will allow him to control objects at will, giving him an edge in battle. Determined to test his abilities, he places his hand on a book. A faint blue glow surrounds his fingers as he focuses. Suddenly, words lift from the pages, forming a large magic circle above him. The symbols spin rapidly, and he realizes that the knowledge of basic manipulation spells is being absorbed directly into his mind. Sweat drips down his face, and his breathing is heavy. He focuses on his pen, convinced that he can make it move. As it rises into the air, he realizes he has successfully learned telekinesis. The ability is now ingrained in him, allowing him to use it without needing to chant a spell. It feels strange to experience something he had only read about in character descriptions. Though the skill is still at a basic level, the potential is clear. If he masters advanced telekinesis, he could reach the level of strength he desires. He considers his next step. Glancing at the books, a thought crosses his mind. What if he engraves the entire magic circle onto his body? In this world, larger magic circles result in greater power. To maximize his telekinesis, he must fully integrate the magic circle into his entire body rather than limiting it to his brain and heart. There are obvious risks, but thanks to his iron body attribute, his enhanced physical abilities should help him endure the effects. Since he still has around 800 mana left, he decides to test it. As he activates the magic, blue energy flows through him. However, the process is far more painful than expected. His bones crack, his muscles tear, and an unbearable agony spreads throughout his body. Despite the excruciating pain, he maintains his composure, refusing to show weakness. When the pain finally subsides, his hands tremble from exhaustion. He has only one mana point left and realizes that he failed due to insufficient energy. However, there is progress. A magic circle is now engraved on his shoulder. At this pace, covering his entire body will take about 2 weeks. A month passes, and the first day of classes at the Magic Tower begins. The students notice that something feels different compared to what they had heard from older students. Instead of a long lecture, D. Kalane's instructions simply tell them to demonstrate their abilities, using any elemental magic. Many are confused about what he is trying to measure, especially since he is nowhere to be seen. Aferin is frustrated, believing this approach is irresponsible. She can't believe that their first lecture has been reduced to self-study. Left with only a sign as guidance, she wonders what kind of person D. Kalane truly is. As she vents her frustration, someone bumps into her. Annoyed, she turns to confront them but stops in surprise when she recognizes Sylvia von Jose Penelade. However, Sylvia simply glances at her and walks away without a reaction. Aferin is left wondering if Sylvia even knows who she is. Later, Aferin focuses on her magic, shaping rocks into a small structure. However, she suddenly feels her mana being drawn away. Looking around, she is startled to see Sylvia constructing an even larger stone formation right beside her. Aferin quickly realizes what happened. Her magic was absorbed and used for Sylvia's structure. Shocked and irritated, she questions what Sylvia is doing, but her words are ignored. Aferin's frustration grew. She demanded to know why Sylvia was ignoring her, but then realization struck. There was no way Sylvia didn't recognize her. She was the one who had threatened Aferin's family and forced her to abandon magic. Now that she had returned, perhaps Sylvia feared she would catch up and surpass her. Sylvia's response was cold. She claimed not to know who Aferin was, but acknowledged her father, calling him a negligent noble who had died. Rage bubbled inside Aferin. The surrounding students sensed the tension, some even jokingly chanting "World Star" as if a fight was about to break out. Before anyone could stop her, Aferin launched herself through the air, preparing an attack, demanding Sylvia take back her words. Sylvia hastily put up a barrier, but the explosion that followed was massive. Some students screamed, asking if anyone was hurt, trying to grasp what had just happened. When the dust settled, Aferin was holding Sylvia by the hair, demanding she repeat herself. But then a strange energy filled the air. The students turned in fear, whispering about a purple aura. Aferin recognized it instantly. It was a void, created when her mana clashed with Sylvia's, sucking in everything around it indiscriminately. Panic spread. If the void exploded, metal fragments would burst out like bullets, killing everyone nearby. The students ran, but Aferin knew there was no escaping it. Just as the explosion became inevitable, a deafening silence filled the air. She opened her eyes to find D. Kalain standing before them, the fragments frozen in mid-air, suspended by his telekinesis. The students were in awe. Though still learners, they couldn't help but admire the sheer beauty of magic unfolding before them. Kulain gathered the fragments into a mass and addressed the students. The lecture was over. Everyone except those responsible for the commotion was dismissed. Aferin felt a chill of panic. She was in serious trouble. The scene shifted to an interrogation room. Aferin realized she was about to be held accountable, possibly for a grave offense. A man entered the room, greeting the chairwoman and Kalain. He was Relin, a professor specializing in support studies. Another professor, Retlen, followed, focusing on spirit studies. The chairwoman, Adeline Segalian, welcomed them, apologizing for the sudden meeting, but relieved they arrived quickly. Relin wasted no time. He demanded to know who had dared lay a hand on a lady of House Aladay. Other professors muttered about how frustrating it was dealing with low-born troublemakers. The odds were stacked against Aferin. Relin praised Kulain for handling the situation before it got worse, and Retlen agreed, calling it impressive. Kulain, however, saw through their flattery. These professors were politically skilled, meaning the outcome of this disciplinary hearing was already decided. Sylvia, a noble's daughter, would be protected, while Aferin, a fallen noble now considered a commoner, had no chance of a fair trial. But Kulain had noticed something earlier. The scarlet energy surrounding Aferin. Only he could see it due to his sharp eyesight, and he recognized it as the mark of a villain's fate beginning to manifest within her. If he couldn't change the outcome of this trial, his own fate might take a dangerous turn as well. The hearing began. The intercom announced the disciplinary meeting between the two debutante mages. The accusation was clear, causing conflict within the school halls and endangering lives. When asked why she fought, Aferin remained silent. She knew Sylvia had insulted her father and provoked her, but she couldn't say it, not in front of her enemies. Relin scoffed, accusing Aferin of an inferiority complex. He reminded her that nobles and commoners were not equals. He then turned to Sylvia, who claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she had accidentally destroyed Aferin's work, which led to an argument. With that, Relin declared Aferin the aggressor, dismissing any justification she might have had. Talks of expulsion began. The injustice stung. Aferin shivered as insults were thrown at her, and there was no one left to protect her. Her father was gone. Her rage swelled. This was all Kulain's fault. If not for him, none of this would have happened. Adeline, sensing the meeting had reached its conclusion, turned to Kulain. As someone present at the scene and a member of the disciplinary committee, she wanted to hear his thoughts before finalizing their decision. Kulain, knowing what was at stake, prepared to speak. As Aferin thinks the situation is over, D. Kulain shifts the focus unexpectedly. Instead of addressing her, he questions Sylvia, asking if she truly believes she had no part in what happened. This catches both of them off guard, as well as the other professors. He continues, pointing out that Sylvia could have prevented the incident but chose not to. Whether it was a lack of ability or a deliberate decision, the outcome remained the same. Sylvia hesitates before admitting that she didn't stop the attack because she wanted Aferin to get into more trouble. Aferin is stunned by this turn of events. It was clear she was the one at fault, so why is D. Kulain directing the discussion towards Sylvia instead? One of the professors argues that the blame lies with the attacker, not the defender. But D. Kulain counters, saying that if they truly want to assign blame based on context, then he, as the lecturer, should take responsibility. This immediately silences the argument. Aferin watches, confused. He's even challenging the professor who is siding with Sylvia. Why is he going so far to defend her? She doesn't know how to feel about it. The chairwoman, Adeline, finally puts an end to the debate, stating that conflicts like these are part of growing up. Since they are still young debutantes, there is no need for harsh disciplinary action. She dismisses the case, allowing both to leave without punishment. Ephraim, who had fully expected to be expelled, is left in disbelief. This isn't the Decalain she remembers. He would have never let her off so easily. As they start to leave, one of the professors commends Decalain for his way of handling the situation, praising his insight and fairness toward students. Before the conversation can continue, Ephraim suddenly calls out to Decalain. When he turns, she stands there with trembling hands, barely able to see him clearly through her blurred vision. She asks if he remembers the name Luna, if he knows her father, the man who spent his entire life suffering under him before taking his own. But then doubt creeps in. If he does remember, what if he changes his mind to protect himself? And if he doesn't remember at all? Wouldn't that be even more devastating? Before she can dwell on it further, he responds. He tells her there's no need to ask. She shouldn't waste her potential dwelling on the past. As he walks away, she remains frozen, realization sinking in. He does remember. If he didn't, there would have been no reason for him to step in. He must have felt responsible in some way and decided to help her. But then another thought creeps in. Was it just pity? Despite her doubts, she can't hold back her tears. It's a relief to know she hasn't been forgotten. If he still remembers her, that's enough for now. Meanwhile, he gains 2 store currency from the encounter. On the way home, Sylvia's father listens as she explains what happened. He reassures her that she doesn't need to worry about that girl anymore. Here, we are introduced to Giltian von Ludwigeleder, an Esper mage, though his exact level remains unclear. He acknowledges that Ephraim has talent, but her time has passed. This makes Sylvia reflect on the past, remembering the day she first met Ephraim 10 years ago during the aptitude exam for academy admission. That day, the mage conducting the test was stunned. It was unheard of. 2 children from the same region possessing the potential to become archmages. Such a coincidence was nearly impossible. As Sylvia and Ephraim locked eyes, they both understood the weight of their abilities. In the world of magic, the highest rank one can reach is the Eternal, a level beyond even the Emperor's authority. Those who reach this status are called archmages, their names carved into history. However, tradition dictates that only 3 archmages can exist at any given time, regardless of their specialization. At that moment, only 1 seat was filled, belonging to Damakin. 2 remained open, though 1 was likely reserved for Adeline, the chairman of the Magic Tower. That left only 1 final spot, a seat that both Sylvia, the heir of the Allied family, and Ephraim, a member of a lesser branch, would have to compete for. Sylvia understood this even before her father explained. She recalled the moment when Gilton told Ephraim's father, Keegan, that his daughter should give up on the entrance exam. That day, the truth became clear. Her family crushed the Luna family's hopes, all for her sake. It was done to ensure that she, not Ephraim, would become the next Archmage. And for Sylvia, this wasn't just her goal, it was her destiny. Still, a lingering frustration remains. Is she truly afraid that Ephraim will catch up? She pushes the thought aside, telling herself it was just a matter of bad luck. Giltheon shifts the conversation, telling her to stop worrying about Ephraim. Instead, she should focus on Decalain. Sylvia questions why, and he explains that Culain is not an ordinary man. Though he may seem stagnant now, he was once considered a genius. If given the chance, he could rise to greatness again. Sylvia already suspected something about him. During the explosion incident, she had made sure Ephraim's mana disappeared. The trap was set so that the moment it came into contact with Ephraim's magic, it would trigger. If things had escalated further, Ephraim would have been in even bigger trouble. Yet Decalain saw through it immediately. She had checked for any traces of magical surveillance beforehand and found none, yet he still managed to uncover the truth. Instead of directly accusing her, he made them settle on a compromise. That wasn't mercy. It was a warning. He knew exactly what she had done, and by forcing her to accept the outcome, he made sure she understood. She had assumed he was nothing more than an arrogant man with slightly above average talent. But now, she isn't so sure. Just who is he really? A few days later, at Decalane's manor, his driver, Roy, arrives and announces that everything is ready. Decalane takes his time before coming down. Once he does, he gets into the carriage, feeling satisfied with his decision to support Aferin. By doing so, he removed a major risk and earned more store currency in the process. He hadn't expected her to be the one who asked that question, and he knows Sylvia might resent him for what happened. But he had no choice. He had to deal with the problem right in front of him. As for social gatherings, he usually prefers to avoid them, but he can't ignore an easy opportunity to earn more store credits. A new side quest appears, attending the New Year's Flower Festival. Completing it would earn him another half a store credit. He still needs to spend 5 credits to unlock the shop, so he figures it's worth checking out any important figures at the event. When the carriage stops, he steps inside the venue, where a large crowd welcomes him. The room is filled with nobles, most of them from high-ranking families. Many of them are people he recognizes, including Yahello, the very person he once tried to model himself after. Coming here was definitely the right call. One of the guests spots him and bursts into laughter, glad to see him. The man eagerly mentions that his son is in Decalane's class. Immediately other guests rush in, eager to introduce themselves. They've been waiting for a chance to meet him. At that moment, Decalane regrets his decision. He hadn't expected this much attention. His thoughts are interrupted when he overhears someone mention the name Ganesha, referencing her achievements in the Continental Journal. That name catches his interest. Annoyed by the nobles crowding him, he waves them off, focusing on his real objective. If he can meet Ganesha, someone who will play a major role in future events, it would be a valuable connection. He scans the area, certain that she's nearby. Sure enough, from the second floor, she watches him with an unreadable expression. She doesn't look pleased. Ganesha is one of the strongest figures early in the story, ranking 5th in terms of power. Her appearance, rough and commanding, gives off the vibe of a seasoned pirate. Decalane is sure she's somewhere close. When he turns, he spots her standing above him. Her distinctive outfit confirms her identity. This is his chance, and he needs to act fast. But before he can make a move, someone else calls his name. Yahello? Decalane curses his timing. Yahello is formally introduced as an Imperial exclusive mage, ranked at the Monarch level, the 4th highest tier of magic users. He greets Decalane with a smirk, pretending to be honored that someone like him remembers their past. He brings up rumors about Decalane's research, implying that his work hasn't progressed in years and that some doubt his abilities. Decalane knows this is nothing more than provocation. The two were once close during their university days, but everything changed when Decalane secured the head professor position. Ever since then, Yahello has harbored resentment. The original Decalane might have been bothered by this, but to him, these taunts are pointless. Besides, there's some truth to the rumors. However, as he glances to his right, he realizes with frustration that Ganesha is gone. Yahello adds one last remark, saying that acting arrogant will only make people dislike him. Decalane barely listens. The real frustration isn't Yahello's words, it's the fact that he just lost his chance to meet Ganesha because of this meaningless conversation. Annoyed, he steps closer to Yahello, making it clear that he's had enough. With a sharp glare, he cuts him off and tells him to leave, calling him exactly what he deserves. Yahello erupts in anger, demanding to know what was just said, but Decalane doesn't have time for him. His priority is finding Ganesha before she leaves the event and securing a connection with her. Unfortunately, his plan quickly falls apart. Inside the hall, people start wondering where he disappeared to. He sighs, realizing that even after dealing with Yahello, too many people are still clinging to him. This is exactly why he avoids social gatherings. Before he can think of a way to escape unnoticed, a woman calls his name. Turning to his right, he finds himself face to face with Ganesh. She immediately questions whether their meeting is a coincidence or if he's been looking for her. He hadn't expected to run into her so soon. But what surprises him more is the feeling that they already have some kind of history. He brushes off the question, saying he just got lost, but she doesn't buy it. She knows he's here for a reason and assumes he has something to say. Before he can respond, she brings up an old mission, apologizing for how things turned out. She reminds him that she returned his advance payment along with the cancellation fee, hoping he can forgive her. It becomes clear that their past interactions were based on some kind of commission. She specifically mentions a child with magic talent, saying that she couldn't go through with handing them over because she grew too attached. He starts to piece things together. Apparently the original D. Kalain had been trying to make up for his own shortcomings by acquiring a gifted child. Then Ganesha asks him a question that catches him off guard. She wants to know how long he plans to keep living this way. Her words make him think. Before possessing this body, the original D. Kalain had been easily swayed by empty flattery, breaking trust and hurting others in his pursuit of fame. But he refuses to follow the same path. He will live differently. Ganesha is visibly surprised. She had assumed he would try to kill her, given that she once accepted a classified mission and then abandoned it. However, he dismisses that thought, saying it's unnecessary. Truthfully, if D. Kalain truly wanted to eliminate her, he'd only be inviting his own death. He doesn't know what the original D. Kalain was thinking, but he does know that Ganesha is someone who could kill a person with nothing but a strand of her hair. Her abilities, an unbreakable body, and mastery of all martial arts make her a nearly invincible fighter. If an assassin had been sent after her, she would have handled it already. Either way, he has no more reason to stay here. His goal of building connections has already been met. He tells her he's leaving, and that she shouldn't worry about things that won't happen. She watches him go, confused by his lack of concern. She asks if he's sure about leaving, hinting at the possibility of assassination attempts or worse. He simply replies that such actions are beneath a noble and walks away, leaving her stunned. As he exits, he reflects on what she said about the power of the Eucline family. If he wanted, he could pressure her through the Adventurers Guild, but doing so would likely accelerate his own downfall. Then, something unexpected happens. A notification appears he has gained a store currency. He's caught off guard. Earlier, the system had marked a death variable as overcome, but now it says avoided. He hadn't even realized that conversation could have led to his death. This only confirms that danger is lurking everywhere, even in casual encounters. Meanwhile, in another part of the venue, a girl named Rayleigh, an adventurer and a relative of Yuli, turns to her and asks how much longer she plans to stay. Yuli, clearly uninterested, mutters that she never wanted to be here in the first place. Rayleigh, sighing, tells her to stop complaining. Changing the topic, Rayleigh suddenly brings up Yuli's fiancé, asking how things are going with him. The question startles Yuli, and she demands to know what Rayleigh is talking about. Rayleigh explains that she's heard many rumors about their relationship and is concerned. Yuli recalls their last meeting, which didn't end well. She admits that, as expected, things are not going well between them. Rayleigh advises Yuli to lower her voice, but Yuli turns her attention to the sound of approaching footsteps. She notices D. Kalain coming down the stairs, his gaze briefly landing on her before turning away. His sudden departure catches everyone's attention. Known for enjoying social events, his early exit fuels speculation. Some wonder if he's avoiding Yuli, reinforcing rumors of tension between them. His early departure from the gathering leads to talk that he left due to conflict with Yuli, though Woojin remains unaware of this. However, his attendance at the event earns him half a store credit, bringing him closer to the 5 credits needed to unlock the shop. A week passes since the event. During this time, aside from his daily memorization and telekinesis training, he focuses on improving his weak stamina. The decision comes after a near-death experience from attempting something reckless. Days earlier, he had tried engraving additional magic circles onto his body, an excruciating process that left him coughing up blood. A normal mage wouldn't have survived, but his iron body attribute kept him alive. His recent encounter with Ganesha fueled his desire for strength, so he added fire control to his existing telekinesis. This engraving process strengthens his metal manipulation by embedding magic at its core, reducing the time required to learn spells. However, the risk is extreme, putting a heavy strain on his body. Recognizing this, he begins training regularly. One morning, after completing an intense workout, he sighs, drenched in sweat, before heading to work. In his office, Alan hands him a document, a notice from the Magic Tower. The Professor Qualification Committee has scheduled an audit hearing in 6 months to review his research progress. Until then, he must prepare the necessary documents. Realizing the implications, he understands that his research had likely stalled long before he took over this body. Losing his professor title would jeopardize his chances of returning to his original world. Determined to find answers, he heads to his laboratory. Upon entering, he finds the lab in complete disarray, as if abandoned for a long time. If D. Cullen had been actively working, it wouldn't be in this state. Scanning the room, he notices a suspicious pile of debris, possibly hiding something important. As he clears it, he discovers a slime covering an old book. Using telekinesis, he retrieves the book, peeling off the mess. He notices that past research had been inscribed in a way to prevent theft, but much of it remains useless. Then, his understanding skill activates, emitting a golden light around him. The brightness confirms that the research holds incredible value. As he examines it, he realizes the research is incomplete. Some sections are missing, and others contain flawed logic. Yet, the depth of knowledge is enough to trigger his abilities. Among the clutter, he finds a locket containing a picture of a young Epherian and her father, though the image of her father is damaged. It becomes clear that Epherian's father, once a researcher under D. Cullen, had desperately tried to conceal something. The long-standing resentment that the Lunar family holds toward D. Cullen now makes sense. His actions had caused Epherian a harsh and unforgiving life. Closing the locket, he vows to complete the research using his understanding skill. If successful, he decides to credit Keegan as a co-author alongside himself. He knows he needs achievements, but he won't take all the credit alone. Later, at the campus cafe, he prepares for what comes next. A girl loudly claims that commoners need to stick together, especially since there are only 30 of them in class. She tries to convince Epherian, saying they need to support each other, but Epherian dismisses it. She used to be a noble, but she has no land or status anymore, so she doesn't see herself that way. The others insist that Epherian is one of them, pointing out that she was also a victim of Sylvia. They believe she should take a stand for commoners. Another girl mentions that starting a club requires a professor's approval, and none of the faculty members would likely support them. They throw out names, rejecting each one, until someone mentions D. Cullen, immediately dismissing the idea, thinking there's no way he would agree. While the discussion continues, Epherian focuses on snacks, hoping they won't actually need his approval. But then, someone suggests that she should be the one to ask D. Cullen. They argue that he treats nobles and commoners the same, and that she even avoided punishment because of him. Epherian doesn't believe he's a good person, and doesn't want to be involved with him. She tries to run away, but Julia, one of the girls, suddenly freezes in fear. Confused, Epherian turns and finds herself face to face with D. Cullen. Julia quickly retreats, leaving Epherian alone. She hesitates, but ultimately hands him the club request, bowing slightly as she explains. She assumes he wouldn't approve of a club for commoners, but figures it's better to try than be pestered about it constantly. To her surprise, he signs the paper without hesitation and tells her to send more details to his office. As he walks away, Epherian is stunned that he agreed so easily. Julia rushes out, shocked that she actually got his signature. Epherian is just as confused, thinking back to the disciplinary committee. She wonders why he's being so cooperative. Later, during a lecture, D. Cullen explains the nature of pure elements and how they form the basis of magic. While he speaks, Epherian's mind is elsewhere. She considers whether he's acting out of guilt or sympathy. After all, he played a role in her father's downfall. Even if he treats her well now, it feels meaningless. If he truly regretted his actions, he should admit them to the world. Her frustration grows, and she clenches her fists. Julia notices her distress and checks on her, but Epherian brushes it off. Then she notices Sylvia and her friends, glaring at her, whispering insults. She realizes she has made enemies among the nobles, despite once being one herself. However, she reassures Julia that it's nothing to worry about, and shifts her attention back to the lesson. Decalain continues explaining magic circles and how small adjustments can alter spells. He demonstrates a technique called flowing fire, showing how 2 strokes can change the color of flames. As he presents his research notes, Aferin remains deep in thought, certain that something about this situation isn't as simple as it seems. Professor Woojin's lectures were unlike anything the students had experienced before. Unlike Decalain, who used his position to boast, Woojin's lessons were mesmerizing. He used mana to bring magic theories to life, making even the most complex ideas easy to understand. The students, including Sylvia, were astonished. Once a prodigy who had lost her love for learning, Sylvia found herself captivated for the first time in years. As Woojin demonstrated, he altered a basic water summoning circle by merging it with a fire magic circle. The flames began to flow like water, a sight none of the students had ever imagined possible. Shock rippled through the classroom. Sylvia, in disbelief, struggled to accept what she was seeing. For most prodigious mages, magic was instinctual, not something learned through rigid theories. To her, theory was just a mold, an inefficient way to grasp magic that hindered real training. Yet, here was Woojin proving otherwise, challenging everything she thought she knew. Meanwhile, Aferin left the lecture deep in thought. It was completely different from the rumors she had heard about Woojin. For the first time, she had been fully engaged in a lesson. As she returned to her dorm, irritation flickered across her face. Graffiti covered her door. Yet another prank, getting worse ever since her conflict with Sylvia. She sighed, preparing to clean it, when she noticed an envelope beneath her door. Picking it up, she found a sponsorship certificate inside. Her initial reaction was disbelief. There was no way it could be real. She was hated by both Decalain and Alate, so why would anyone sponsor her? Deciding to report it as a forgery, she marched to the magical administration office. However, when the professor examined the seal, he confirmed its authenticity. The realization hit her like a wave. Someone had recognized her potential. Overwhelmed with emotion, she returned to her dorm. Sitting at her desk, she pinched her cheeks, hoping to wake up from what felt like a dream. She couldn't contain her joy, yet paranoia crept in. What if others found out? What if someone tried to take advantage of her newfound wealth? She hastily considered packing an emergency suitcase, regretting her visit to the office, where a girl had given her a strange look. Was she after her money? No, that was ridiculous. Aferin shook her head, trying to calm herself, but as relief washed over her, tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt genuinely happy. Someone had acknowledged her. Maybe the world wasn't so cruel after all. Elsewhere, in the grand halls of Ukli de Mana, Uriel questioned the latest news. A man confirmed that Decalain was currently attending the auction for the rare Schnazen jewel. She tensed, recalling how much money he had wasted last year. What kind of trouble would he cause this time? She vowed that if he continued his reckless behavior, she wouldn't forgive him. At the auction, Decalain was focused on his goal. His first experience with telekinesis had made him realize his need for a special kind of metal to compensate for his lack of talent. The wooden steel he currently used was merely a temporary fix. But today, the real deal was finally within his grasp. As he entered the VIP waiting room, his eyes landed on a familiar figure. Yuli stood before him, her expression unreadable. She slowly approached, her gaze sharp. Decalain, taken aback, hadn't expected to meet her here. Yuli greeted him formally, but quickly brought up the disciplinary action he had taken against 2 young mages. Decalain dismissed it as old news, but Yuli was not satisfied. She warned him these were newly appointed debutantes, and crushing their dreams so early would only come back to haunt him. She reminded him of past mistakes, and urged him not to repeat them. This was the only genuine advice she could give him, and it would be up to him whether or not to heed it. Decalain listened as she made it clear that these were her final words to him, cutting off their connection entirely. He felt the same way. No matter how beautiful she was, marriage was never something he considered. especially given the risks involved. Being around her was dangerous, and if things went wrong, he might not even survive until the wedding day. The pressure was simply too much. As she turned to leave, he found himself wondering why she was even at the auction. It didn't seem like the kind of place she would normally be. Was she really here just to say this to him? The thought seemed to catch her off guard, and she quickly denied it, insisting she had her own reasons for attending. She seemed flustered, but he didn't press further. Despite telling himself to keep his distance, he noticed something different about her. For the first time, she wasn't her usual composed self. He found it strange that he even considered it endearing. Was he being influenced by Kulain's emotions? He had always been careful not to let his personality change. But now, he wasn't so sure. Before he could dwell on it further, an announcement signaled the start of the auction. He convinced himself he was overthinking things. His heart wasn't racing, so it wasn't anything serious. The first item was unveiled, an intricately crafted vase from the east. A bright golden glow surrounded it, reminding him of something he had seen in Ifarian's research. It caught his attention, making him consider buying it. As the auctioneer rapidly increased the bidding, the price climbed higher and higher. Despite the competition, he placed his own bid and ended up winning the vase. Even after reaching such a high price, its glow remained strong, suggesting its value was greater than expected. With a balance of $205 million in his account, he decided to continue investing. He purchased a ring for $3 million, a pair of scissors for $2.1 million, and a necklace for $4.3 million. Another item followed at $5.5 million. The audience quickly took notice, murmuring about how he was buying everything in sight. It wasn't long before people started recognizing him. Yuli sighed, frustrated by how much attention he seemed to crave, even in a place like this. She couldn't believe how easily he threw away money just to satisfy his ego. To her, humility and modesty held more value, but she decided to ignore him for now. Her priority was obtaining the winter's fire. As the auction reached its final item, anticipation filled the room. The announcer revealed something extremely rare, an ore with a long history in the Empire, known as the Snowflare Stone. It was a natural wonder, containing both heat and cold energies, and had been used to forge legendary weapons. Both Yuli and Kulain had been searching for it. Kulain knew its true worth. It was one of the 10 rarest metals in existence, second only to materials like dragon bones. Owning it meant having the perfect ingredient for crafting an unmatched weapon. But Yuli was just as determined to claim it for herself. As bidding started, the price soared to $30 million. Yuli thought she had won until Kulain outbid her by $1 million. Annoyed she couldn't believe he was still interfering, convinced he was doing it on purpose. The competition escalated, with both increasing their bids by $1 million each time. Whispers spread in the audience, with some assuming Kulain was buying it as a gift for his fiancée. They misread the situation, believing his spending showed his devotion. He realized then that he had been competing against Yuli. If he won, she would surely hold a grudge. But letting go wasn't an option. The stone hadn't appeared on the market for 3 years, and there was no telling when it would surface again. In the final moments, Kulain placed the highest bid, $42 million. The announcer confirmed guest number 777 as the winner, and the audience erupted in excitement over the intense bidding war. Meanwhile, Yuli was furious, hearing people criticize her while praising Kulain for his so-called romantic gesture. The scene reminded her of the past. On the day of their engagement, he had flaunted his wealth, offering her anything she desired, but instead of feeling special, she felt humiliated. He never understood what she truly wanted, and in the end she walked away, ruining the engagement herself. However, rumors soon spread that she had only accepted him to secure a knight position. She knew exactly who was behind them, and her reputation suffered because of it. Even now, she refused to believe he had changed. She thought his actions at the auction were another way to manipulate her. But then, he did something unexpected. He walked up to her and, instead of gloating, simply apologized before leaving. For a moment, she stood in shock. Apologies were not something she ever expected from him. As she processed what had happened, her sister, Josephine, arrived to pick her up. Later that night, Kulain reflected on the situation, assuming Yuli had wanted to keep the stone for herself. It was surprising that no death warning had appeared. Maybe things weren't as bad as he thought. When he arrived home, the maids greeted him, but something felt off. Sensing a shift in the atmosphere, he asked if something had happened. They informed him that Uriel was waiting for him upstairs. He headed to the room, preparing himself for what was to come. Ralia, a member of the Red Garnet adventure team under Ganesha's leadership, observes Decalain and notes that he seems different, almost as if he has a more human side now. With this realization, she decides that keeping an eye on him is no longer necessary. She had intended to ask if he was still searching for a magic slave, but judging by his actions, it didn't seem like it. Instead, she focused on wrapping things up. Everything they overheard today needed to remain a secret, and everyone was expected to stay quiet about it. With that, the group gathered, held hands, and disappeared through teleportation. The next day, inside the magic tower, Decolain sat in his office, analyzing the system store. He was particularly interested in an upgrade that would enhance his mana quality, increasing his efficiency in channeling magic. The cost was 10 points, but he didn't have enough yet. The system's store allowed him to use in-game currency to strengthen himself and even boost the abilities of named characters. However, access was limited. By the end of the second half, there were only 6 opportunities to use it, and since each upgrade doubled in cost with every level gained, careful planning was necessary. Determined to improve, he incorporated daily training into his routine, focusing on memorization, physical endurance, and refining his flying mind blades. Yet, despite his efforts, he still lagged behind the most notorious named villains. For now, the biggest priority was enhancing his mana, which meant earning 4 more credits before he could afford the upgrade. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When he allowed the visitor inside, Alan entered, looking exhausted. Handing over a document, Alan urged him to read it carefully, as it was an urgent report from that day's issue of the Wizard Journal. The headline covered the emergence of Lockhart, a notorious figure known as the Wizard Killer. Decalain immediately recognized the name. Lockhart was the biggest threat to mage players in the early stages of the game, and it made sense that he was starting to make an appearance. However, unlike an ordinary mage who would be in danger, Decalain saw this as an opportunity to earn store credits. If he encountered Lockhart, he planned to turn the situation in his favor. Reassuring Alan that the Wizard Killer wasn't a concern, Decalain mentioned he would be heading to the library and advised Alan to go back soon as well. But before Alan could leave, Decalain suddenly stopped and asked if he had any interest in becoming an assistant professor. Alan, caught off guard, processed the question before realizing what Decalain was implying. His reaction was immediate. He was shocked, even yelling in disbelief. Decalain had always criticized his lack of talent, so this suggestion seemed completely unexpected. Decalain clarified that his decision wasn't based on a change of heart, but rather because he had received an official notice requiring him to appoint an assistant professor. Before Alan could say much, Decalain, already tired of the conversation, handed him a bracelet engraved with the Eucline emblem. Alan expressed his gratitude, but Decalain simply stated that his skills in organizing documents and handling tasks were excellent, making him useful. He couldn't afford to let him leave, especially since many others had given up and walked away due to Decalain's harsh nature. Alan had endured everything on his own, and while he hadn't quit yet, there was no guarantee he wouldn't eventually. Before dismissing him, Decalain handed Alan some money, telling him to head home early and buy himself a proper meal. Alan wanted to protest that it was too much, but before he could say anything, Decalain walked away, maintaining the composed and dignified presence of a noble. Left behind, Alan simply sat there, feeling satisfied that he was finally being acknowledged. The scene then shifts to a restricted library, meant for staff members only. Decalain arrived with a clear purpose. He needed to analyze Luna's research paper. The document he had found earlier in the laboratory focused on creating pure elements, but it was filled with inconsistencies and flaws. His goal was to correct those mistakes. He also hoped to find useful books on elemental manipulation. As he searched the shelves, he noticed someone in the library who didn't belong there. It was Sylvia, looking just as surprised to see him. A flashback reveals what had happened 10 minutes earlier. At the library's front desk, a staff member informed Professor Rellin that Sylvia had come looking for study materials. Normally, the executive reading room was restricted, but Rellin dismissed the rule, saying that as the successor of the Ayates family and a standout rookie mage, she should have access. With the professor's approval, Sylvia was allowed to browse freely. One of Sylvia's passions was studying languages and literature. She had entered the restricted section in search of a rare book that fit both interests. The novel she found was written in ethanol, the language of the fairies. Since the fairies had vanished, their language had become extremely valuable, making books in ethanol rare treasures. She hadn't expected to run into Decalain there. When he questioned her presence, she was startled, unsure how to respond. He seemed amused, hinting that she might be looking to face disciplinary action again. She, on the other hand, was more surprised that he was even in a library, given his usual habits. She explained that she had permission from Professor Rellin, but Decalain pointed out that this meant both the professor and the librarian had disregarded school regulations. If necessary, he would make sure they faced consequences. Then, noticing the book she was holding, he used telekinesis to pull it toward himself. Realizing it was an ethanol novel, he remarked that she had broken the rules just to get her hands on a romance book written in the fairy language. Sylvia, embarrassed, asked how he could even read ethanol, insisting that wasn't the point. Her interest lay in literature and languages. Decalain handed the book back, telling her he would overlook it this time. However, if she returned without proper permission, he would take disciplinary action. If she truly wanted the book, she should send someone else to retrieve it, rather than using her family's influence to bend the rules. As he walked away, Sylvia stood there, gripping the book tightly, feeling a mix of frustration and humiliation. She had only wanted to understand the fairies better through their literature. Pouting slightly, she wondered how Decalain could read ethanol so easily when the language itself lacked consistency, making it difficult to interpret. Later, during an outdoor class, the professors observed the students, who were engaged in their assigned activities. Despite it being their first practical training session, they all appeared calm and focused. Retlin noted that they seemed unshaken by the mountain of darkness and remarked that the session would have to end before nightfall. Still, he was pleased with their progress. The Mountain of Darkness was located a short distance from the university grounds, serving as an important yet dangerous area for the Magic Tower. It was both a training site for real-world combat experience and a rich source of magical materials. Because of the risks posed by wild beasts and venomous creatures, multiple protective barriers were in place, and a professor was always assigned to patrol the area. Rellin pointed out that no professor had been assigned this week and asked for suggestions on who should take the role. Without hesitation, Decalain volunteered to take the lead. Rellin acknowledged that it was expected of someone in his position, as he set an example of what a professor should be. However, Decalain dismissed the idea that his decision was noble. It was simply because he had received a side quest that offered additional rewards. Something felt off about the forest, which likely explained why he had been given the task. He anticipated that whatever was about to unfold would turn the usual training ground into a nightmare once night fell. As the students and professors wrapped up their activities and began leaving, the scene shifted to 9 hours later, at a cafe near the Magic Tower. At the cafe, students admired the beautifully plated food, joking that it looked too good to eat. A fairy beamed with pride as she treated them, revealing that she had a sponsor. She happily reassured them that she would cover the cost, making everyone excited. Meanwhile, Julia mentioned that she had submitted the application to establish a new club and expected it to be approved soon. She encouraged the group to think of this gathering as their first official meeting. Another student expressed concern about the low number of people signing up, but Julia remained optimistic, believing that once the club gained traction, more would join. During their conversation, they discussed an event earlier at the Mountain of Darkness, where 50 students had volunteered for a training session. Accidents sometimes occurred there, making it a bold choice. Just as they were talking, a loud explosion shook the area, grabbing everyone's attention. Startled, they rushed toward the source of the blast. Julia led the way, but as they ran, she suddenly noticed something off and tried to warn Ephraim. However, Ephraim was already too far ahead. The moment she realized what Julia had said, she looked around and found herself no longer on the busy cafe street, but deep inside a forest. A distant voice called for help, and Ephraim instinctively ran toward it. As she got closer, she saw a figure ahead and asked if they were all right, only to witness their throat being torn open before her eyes. Terror gripped her as the woman's screams echoed through the night. Confused and horrified, she barely had time to react before spotting a familiar figure, Cullen. He was standing nearby, and something about the scene made her uneasy. She immediately accused him of attacking the woman, questioning how he could harm a civilian. But before she could act, he told her to take another look. When she turned back, the so-called victim was gone, replaced by a monstrous, grotesque creature. It was nothing like a human, more like an overgrown insect with a twisted, nightmarish form. Realization hit her. She had been caught in an illusion, a trick demons were known to use. Cullen lifted her with telekinesis and told her to leave. She demanded an explanation, but before she could protest, he floated her away, making it clear that he had no time for distractions. His real target was the demon. Furious at losing its prey, the demon lunged at him. Cullen reacted instantly, dodging its attacks with precise movements. The creature was fast, countering his strikes and forcing him to stay on the defensive. When it attempted a direct charge, he blocked it using telekinesis before leaping into the air. Noting the glowing core on its forehead, he deduced that the demon specialized in illusion magic. Unlike others who might struggle against mental interference, he was unaffected. However, something else was stirring within him. His lineage carried an instinctive aggression toward demons. The presence of demonic energy in the area only fueled his anger further. The power he inherited allowed him to purify corrupted mana, making him an exceptional force against demonic entities. And right now, every fiber of his being was calling for battle. The Cullen bloodline, known for hunting demons for generations, had awakened in Cullen. He would never allow the demon before him to live. With his eyes glowing red from fury, he launched a stone straight into the demon's forehead, crushing its skull. As the creature collapsed, his side quest was marked complete, earning him a store credit. Additionally, defeating his first demon granted him another credit and unlocked his family lineage's hidden ability. The demon's mere presence disgusted him. Its stench irritated him, and its arrival signaled the true beginning of something bigger. He glanced up at the moonlit sky, seeing it as a sign, the start of a game missing its main player. As time passed, dawn arrived, and the sun cast its light over the academy. Ephraim slowly opened her eyes, jolting awake. A nurse beside her informed her that she had finally regained consciousness. Confused, Ephraim asked what had happened, recalling being in the forest. The nurse explained that she had been under a demon's spell and had passed out. She had been found later and brought to the clinic for treatment. The Mountain of Darkness had since been shut down due to the demon's appearance, and the Magic Tower was now investigating the situation. The nurse also mentioned that Cullen was the one who had saved her. Ephraim groaned in frustration, annoyed that he had come to her rescue yet again. She then asked what day it was. The nurse replied that she had been unconscious for 36 hours. It was now Wednesday. Realization hit Ephraim. If it was Wednesday, that meant she was late. She screamed, bolting out of bed. Elsewhere, a group of students turned their heads as the doors to the classroom burst open. Aferin stood there panting, exclaiming that she had barely made it. Julia waved her over and asked if she was okay, mentioning that she had visited her at the clinic, but Aferin hadn't woken up yet. Aferin assured her that she was fine, better than ever thanks to all the sleep she had gotten, but as she looked around, she realized something was different. She asked Julia if she had missed an announcement about class today. Julia was equally confused, saying it had been like this when she arrived. There had to be a special lesson planned. Kalane entered the room alongside a new figure, Alan. Aferin wondered who he was. Kalane quickly announced that before the lesson began, he had an introduction to make. Alan would be his new teaching assistant. The class murmured in surprise. Kalane had always worked alone. He had never taken on an assistant before. Some students speculated that becoming a teaching assistant would boost one's career, but knowing Kalane, he wouldn't allow that without reason. Aferin thought back to her father, who had been a researcher at 30 but had never been allowed such a position. Why had Kalane chosen someone new instead of a more experienced mage? Ignoring the whispers, Kalane moved on. Today's lesson was about learning through experience. The students would have 3 hours to complete their assigned tasks. Alan handed out the clocks that would track their progress. Aferin glanced at the bracelet on her wrist, the vessel for her material magic. Every time she looked at it, she was reminded of her father's connection to Kalane. Why had her father cast him aside, leaving him to rot without a chance? And now, after so many years, why was Kalane doing so many things to help her? Shaking off her thoughts, she focused on the task at hand. She needed to think of a spell, but her mind was cluttered with distractions. Suddenly, Sylvia announced that she was finished. Only 25 minutes and 15 seconds had passed. The class was shocked. It hadn't even been half an hour. Of course, it was Sylvia. Kalane inspected her work while she nervously waited. He examined it thoroughly before stating it was perfect. She was free to leave. A proud smile crossed her face as she stood up, glancing at Aferin, who was still struggling. Sylvia sighed, thinking how much better she was, which only irritated Aferin further. Determined to succeed, Aferin pushed forward. One by one, students completed their assignments and were dismissed, except for her. Time ticked away. 3 hours had passed. She was the only one left. Sitting there alone, Aferin felt a sinking feeling in her chest. She had failed. Anger surged within her. She slammed her hands on the table, trying to force herself to think of something, anything. Not only had she fallen behind Sylvia, but she was also the only one who hadn't completed the task at all. Why was she like this? Was she really so incompetent that she couldn't do something so simple? Frustration turned into self-doubt. She stood up, muttering to herself that she had no excuse. If she couldn't even handle this, she shouldn't have come to the academy at all. A voice broke the silence. Kalane spoke, stating that it had been 5 hours and 47 minutes. How much longer did she intend to make him wait? Aferin, surprised, turned to face him. She hadn't expected him to still be there. He told her that she had broken down over an easy assignment and failed to complete it on time. She apologized, but he cut her off. It didn't matter if people laughed at her, if they got ahead of her, or even if the person she resented was standing right in front of her. She needed to remain calm and logical at all times. With a weak mindset like hers, she would never reach his level. He had expected more from her, and now he was disappointed. With that, he turned and walked away, closing the door behind him. Alone, Aferin sank into her thoughts. She stared at the clock before her. Slowly she sat back down, determination burning inside her. Kalane's words echoed in her mind, fueling her frustration. Her hands clenched into fists. She refused to let him be right about her. Even if he was disappointed, even if she was the last one standing, she would do this. No matter what. Her nose began to bleed as she pushed her magic beyond its limits. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She would prove herself, no matter what it took. Declan knew spending over 6 hours on Aferin wasn't a waste. It was a necessary step for what lay ahead. The the demon's appearance on the Mountain of Darkness made one thing clear: the main quest was about to begin. When the age of overwhelming evil arrives, all strong-willed characters aligned with goodwill step into the conflict. Among them will be a much stronger Aferin. Right now, she lacks the mindset and instincts of a true mage, but once she overcomes those weaknesses, her growth will be unstoppable. This could pose a threat to him in the future, but he wouldn't allow that. To him, fate was just an excuse for those unwilling to work for their success. He trusted only his own strength. Someone like Aferin wouldn't be catching up to him anytime soon. Her magic finally faded, and without a word, she stormed out of the room. She walked past him, her gaze locked on the ground, not even noticing his presence. He entered the classroom and approached her desk. The flower she had struggled to grow was now complete. She had finished her assignment after 6 hours and 25 minutes. Her lack of formal academy training was evident, but the quality of her work was impressive, on par with the best students. As he processed this, he earned a store credit, but his focus quickly shifted. Now that Aferin was gone, it was time for him to return home. However, just as he turned, someone was already waiting for him. A voice called out, and laughter followed. Dicalane's expression tensed as he recognized the man. It was Zeit, a member of the Freydin family and Yuli's older brother, the one who had pushed for their engagement. More importantly, Zeit was ranked 3rd in combat power, above even Ganesha. He was known for his overwhelming strength, and Dicalane immediately suspected the visit had something to do with the snowflake stone. If that was the case, things could turn dangerous fast. Zeit seemed amused as he observed him. He mentioned hearing about the issues between Dicalane and Yuli and had grown concerned. To address it, he wanted to arrange a dinner later in the week. The invitation, however, felt more like a demand. Dicalane quickly agreed, sensing that Zeit was still maintaining a friendly front. The man placed a firm hand on his shoulder, his grip unmistakably authoritative. He assured him that he would handle all the details and that Dicalane only needed to attend. Then, with a cold finality, he ended the conversation and walked away. Delswan exhaled. There had never been a choice. Zeit had worded it in a way that made refusal impossible. The Freydin family came first for Zeit, and any disruption to his plans could have unpredictable consequences. Backing out wasn't an option. The next day, within the Freydin estate, Yuli was already voicing her frustration. She outright refused the idea of dinner. Zeit questioned her reluctance, but she insisted that she and Dicalane despised each other besides. She was too busy training her knights to waste time on a pointless meal. He asked if she was still upset over the stolen Snowflare stone. She denied it, though her reaction said otherwise. From the sidelines, another figure silently watched their exchange. Zeit remained firm. He pointed out that the metal he had purchased could only be used to forge a weapon, and that weapon was meant for her. But Yuli was unmoved. If he was planning to give her a sword, then she would take it as a sign to end this engagement once and for all. Zeit's patience was wearing thin. A faint red aura surrounded him as he reminded Yuli of his warning. Acting on emotions was foolish. Politics had no room for personal feelings. He questioned her directly, asking if she had grown fond of someone. She denied it, but he pressed further, asking if she doubted his record or had another reason. When she hesitated, unable to answer, he dismissed her uncertainty. The matter would be settled later, and she was expected to be on time. As he walked away, she clenched her fists, her frustration building. Unable to contain it, she unsheathed her sword and swung furiously, releasing a blast of energy. Left alone, she sat in silence, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't express. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Varin, a knight from the Order of Heatkin and her loyal subordinate, observed the unstable energy in her strikes. She apologized for showing weakness, but he reassured her that he understood. He never believed Dicalane was the right match for her and resented the forced engagement. However, she quickly shut down any criticism of her family's decision, reminding him that a knight should not speak ill of others. She turned to him with a firm expression, telling him not to stain his hands for her sake. She would handle it herself. But Varin could see through her words. She was only pretending to be fine. As she left to prepare for dinner, He remained behind, his frustration growing. The situation was unfair, and now he had finally made up his mind. He would do what was necessary to protect her happiness. Meanwhile, at the Birch Assembly of Elders, the leaders discussed a troubling event. A demon had appeared on the Mountain of Darkness. Magecraft was originally developed to destroy such creatures, and with their return, action had to be taken. They agreed to summon the 12 sorcerers of Birch to confront the looming threat. Back at the academy, Decalain finished sorting through the valuable items he had acquired at the auction. He equipped Rufrin's ring to aid his mana recovery and the ancient rune necklace to store energy. The rest would be placed in a secure vault, as Ganesha had advised, to prevent theft. However, one item remained a problem. The most important artifact refused to respond to his magic. He had known the Snowflare Stone wouldn't be easy to use, but no matter how much he tried, his telekinesis had no effect on it. Its mana seemed to resist him entirely. In the past, this stone had been too expensive for him to obtain in games, so he had only admired it from a distance. Now, possessing it in reality, he still didn't know how to unlock its power. Smelting it forcefully might not even work. Then, a thought struck him. He recalled reading about a legendary sword that required a process known as communion, a method of forming an understanding with the weapon itself. If that principle applied here, perhaps he could forge a connection with the stone. He reached out and channeled his mana. A strange sensation spread through his hand, not quite painful, but an odd tingling. The stone reacted slightly, and when he pulled away, he saw that his understanding of it had increased by a mere 0.1%. Yet, the effort had drained 2,000 mana. At this pace, it would take him a full year to make any progress. He wondered if this was truly the best approach, or if there was another way. Pushing the thought aside, he turned to his calendar. Today was the dinner Zeit had arranged, and another event loomed just days away. It was something predetermined before he had taken over this body. A date that made him uneasy. In 3 days, it would be the death anniversary. That evening, at the upscale restaurant Von Michel, Zeit welcomed Decalain with his usual confidence. He mentioned that Yuli had arrived earlier and was already inside. With a grin, he opened the door and made a teasing remark about how stunning she looked dressed up. For a moment, it almost seemed like he was trying to charm Decalain instead. Decalain is momentarily taken aback by how stunning Yuli looks, as he is used to seeing her in armor. He realizes that she stands out even more when dressed like this, and understands why he was drawn to her in the first place. As he admires her, another voice speaks up, reminding him of the effort it took for this moment. Turning to the side, he recognizes the person immediately. Zite is speaking to her. Decalain is so focused on Yuli that he doesn't even notice Josephine at first. She isn't just Yuli's sister. She is a dangerous figure, someone he must be cautious of. As the head of a powerful underground intelligence network, she is ruthless and will do anything to achieve her goals. The only person she truly cares about is Yuli, and anyone who wrongs her risks facing Josephine's wrath. Even though she hasn't acted against him yet, he can feel her hostility the moment he steps into the room. This confirms how precarious his situation is. If he makes one wrong move, his fate as a villain will be sealed. As the meal begins, Zeit shifts the conversation to business, asking when the marriage ceremony will take place, as the engagement has already lasted 3 years. Before Yuli can respond, Zeit dismisses her, insisting that this is a matter for the adults. Decalain tries to answer, but Zeit cuts him off, pressing him for a decision. When Decalain looks toward Josephine, he sees her watching intently, smiling as if testing him. Understanding the danger, Decalain carefully states that he will leave the decision entirely to Yuli. If she no longer wishes to continue this engagement, he is prepared to accept her choice. His words immediately cause tension. Zite questions how he can treat such an important matter so lightly, reminding him that breaking the engagement is not a simple task. The elders would never approve of such a decision. Yuli, her voice cold, interrupts and firmly asks her brother to allow them to speak in private. Zite hesitates but eventually agrees, signaling Josephine to leave with him. As Josephine exits, she cheerfully wishes them a good conversation, but her presence lingers just outside the room. The air inside grows heavy as Yuli, filled with frustration, demands to know what game Kulane is playing this time. Outside, Josephine and Zeit wait, knowing exactly what is happening. Kulane glances toward the door, realizing that Josephine is likely listening in. She may have acted as if she left, but there is no doubt that she is eavesdropping. However, this presents an opportunity. Josephine does not know that Kalan is aware of her tactics. If he can convince her that he truly loves Yuli, he might be able to change his fate and avoid the threat she poses. With that in mind, he calmly states his reasoning, knowing Josephine is listening. Yuli, still skeptical, questions his intentions, reminding him of how he forced the engagement years ago. She recalls the promises he made to gain the elder's approval and the pressure he placed on her to abandon her aspirations. When she refused to follow his plans, he spread damaging rumors about her. The memories of those betrayals resurface, and tears form in her eyes as she demands to know what he is really trying to do now. Kulane acknowledges everything he has done, realizing that his obsession and need to control Yuli were never true affection. By tearing down everything around her, he left her with no other choice but to stay by his side. He fully understands why she resents him. His past actions were unforgivable. Yuli, however, refuses to believe his words, dismissing them outright. But Kulane continues, admitting that he has been holding her back and that he is fully aware of his mistakes. His honesty catches her off guard. He then points out that her own brother and sister have also played a role in controlling her future. She tries to deny it, but he challenges her, questioning why they would be so against breaking off the engagement if it weren't for reasons beyond family honor. Josephine remains outside, listening carefully. As Kulane calmly continues eating, he brings up something even more important: Yuli's dream of becoming a defender. To pursue that path, she must eventually leave her family. He asks if he is wrong about this. She demands to know how he even found out, but his response is blunt. He has never been an honest or loyal person, and he lacks the qualities she values in others. He is not the right person for her. She grows impatient, urging him to get to the point. He finally explains his decision. He will maintain their engagement, but never force her into marriage. Though he truly wants to set her free, the situation is too complicated, with too many forces working against them. However, as long as she needs a shield, she can use his name to protect herself until she is ready to pursue her dream. Until then, he will wait. Suspicious, she questions his true motives. He insists that he expects nothing in return, but if he were to wish for something, it would be to see her smile once a month. That alone would be enough. His sincerity catches her completely off guard, causing her face to flush with embarrassment. Even Josephine, listening from outside, seems taken aback by his words. Kulane, meanwhile, reminds himself that his only goal was to navigate a dangerous situation and avoid the worst possible outcome. Yet, seeing Yuli so flustered over his words makes him pause. He can't deny that there is something undeniably endearing about the way she reacts. Perhaps even the feelings he once believed were an obsession have started to change into something different. Yuli, struggling to regain her composure, quickly pushes aside her emotions and insists that she won't be deceived again. She won't fall for his schemes. But Kulane only laughs, amused by her reaction. Annoyed, she demands to know why he's laughing when she just told him she won't be fooled. Josephine watches with amusement, noting that while the situation is a bit embarrassing, it might mean his feelings are real. If that's the case, she wants to keep observing for a little longer. Kulane successfully avoids a dangerous outcome and gains 2 credits. A few days later, as he drives through the city, he reflects on how quickly time has passed. The anniversary of a significant loss has arrived. Walking through the graveyard, he feels the heavy atmosphere settling in. The setting sun casts an eerie glow between the cracks of old tombstones, blending with overgrown weeds. Before his body even reacts, his heart is already drawn into the memories this place holds. Not Kulane's, but his own, as Wu-Chin. A memory resurfaces. A conversation with Aura. Late one night, she had excitedly told him about an idea for an Easter egg in their game, wanting to add more depth to Kalane's backstory since he was a mid-boss. Woojin had dismissed it, arguing that it would only add to their workload without boosting sales. But she had been determined, saying it mattered in its own way. She believed in putting their hearts into their work. He hadn't understood her enthusiasm back then, brushing it off as one of her usual ideas. Now, standing in the graveyard, he sees her name carved into a tombstone. A message of gratitude is etched below it. The realization hits him. She had modeled Kalane after him. But why had she chosen her own name for his fictional fiancé? And why had she thanked him? As he touches the stone, waves of emotion crash over him. Memories come rushing back. The way she praised his drawings, how she gave him her coat when he was cold, how she comforted him and spoke of love, the 7 years they spent side by side. Overcome with emotion, he breaks down, his tears falling onto the ground. As he grieves, a figure approaches in the distance. A man watches him with a smirk, finally tracking him down. The intruder, a mage killer, recognizes him instantly. Kalane quickly regains his composure, wiping away any trace of his earlier sorrow. He spots the shadow in front of him and immediately recognizes the man, Lockhart. Lockhart is taken aback that Kalane knows who he is. He sees all mages as arrogant, and he can't believe one is addressing him so casually. Kalane, however, knows all about him. Lockhart is a special enemy that only mage characters encounter. His unique ability, magic nullification, makes him a natural predator to magic users. It's a powerful trait with no real limitations. Magic simply ceases to function in his presence. Lockhart quickly puts distance between them, confident in his ability. He taunts Kalane, swinging at him with full force, but Kalane is already moving. He dodges backward, avoiding the attack, then ducks under a follow-up strike, continuously creating space. Most mages would panic in this situation, unable to fight without their magic, but Kalane knows better. As Lockhart lunges again, Kalane suddenly counters with a devastating punch to the face, sending him crashing to the ground. Lockhart curses him, but Kalane remains calm. A few days ago, he had finally saved up enough store credits to purchase an upgrade in mana efficiency. It had boosted his power far beyond what he expected. Even a simple act like lifting a chair had nearly sent it through the ceiling. His overall strength had improved, making it easier to handle opponents like Lockhart. Now, Lockhart lies on the ground, defeated. Kalane gains 2 more credits for overcoming the encounter. Lockhart, still struggling, begins cursing all mages, ranting about how they are nothing without their magic. But Kalane has already moved on. Kalane, however, is no ordinary mage. He has trained both his body and mind, making him a warrior beyond the limits of typical magic users. As Lockhart struggles, Kalane recognizes something about him. He belongs to the Blood Shroud race, a group feared and hunted for their demonic ancestry. Though they hide among humans, they are natural enemies of mages. Their history is marked by persecution, and even now, purges against them continue. Kalane acknowledges Lockhart's pain, understanding the suffering his kind has endured. However, he warns him that becoming a killer himself would only turn him into the very monster he despises. Lockhart refuses to listen, filled with rage and hopelessness. But Kalane remains calm, explaining that despite his origins, Lockhart is not a demon, he is human. His noble lineage, known for slaying demons, would have instinctively reacted if Lockhart were truly one. The realization shakes Lockhart. In the next moment, reinforcements arrive. Kalane swiftly subdues Lockhart, making sure he is captured without unnecessary bloodshed. Inspector Roper arrives, impressed by his strength. They secure Lockhart with steel restraints, as magical ones would be useless against him. Before leaving, Kalane reflects on the battle. He is relieved he avoided needless violence, especially in a place so deeply tied to Aura's memory. The following day, at the Euclid estate, a summons arrives. A major meeting in Birch has been called for the first time in 15 years. A recent demon sighting in the Mountain of Darkness has alarmed the authorities, and mages are being summoned for discussions. This marks the beginning of a significant quest. Birch Call. Kalane is given the option to bring 2 companions, including a bodyguard. His relative, Uriel, insists that he should not travel alone. She suggests hiring a skilled mercenary, but he refuses, preferring to handle things himself. Still, she insists on finding someone reliable for his safety. Meanwhile, in the Fraheim Knights' training grounds, warriors are hard at work. Among them, someone watches from the shadows, contemplating his next move. A man turns around, startled by the presence behind him. He jokes about how sharp the person's appearance is, but then flinches, clearly caught off guard. He brings up a request they've received, an important one, but something about it seems suspicious, making him hesitate on whether they should accept it. Varan, without much concern, tells him to go ahead and submit it to Yuli. However, the request itself is unusual. It involves guarding Kalane, though officially, it is about protecting the entire train. The setup seems intentional, as if the job was designed to ensure Kalane receives extra protection. Varan believes they should accept the request, as train security is a prestigious task not given to just anyone. If they succeed, their knighthood's reputation will soar, and it will also provide much-needed funding for their private order. As the conversation shifts to Kalane and Yuli's past, Varan shuts it down, stating that their leader is someone who would never allow personal emotions to interfere with duty. His companion agrees and says they should inform Yuli immediately. Varan, however, sees an opportunity in all of this. Birch is located at a high altitude, about 3,500 meters above sea level, in the northern part of the continent. It is home to the Councilor's mages, who oversee magic affairs. Birch's decisions influence every magical institution, including the Mage Tower, and even the floating island of mages. It is so powerful that it is considered the backbone of the magical world. Despite this, summit assemblies are rare, happening only once every few decades. For any mage, receiving an invitation to Birch is an honor, akin to receiving a medal of distinction. Yet, Birch is also known by another name: the Graveyard of Mages. At the train station, on the platform heading toward Birch, Yuli oversees the final preparations. She reassures one of her men that everything is in order. Just then, Alan arrives with Kalane. They note the lingering snow, despite it being April. Yuli, trying to maintain professionalism, welcomes them. She announces that from this transfer station onward, the Fraheim Knights will be responsible for security. Though her words are formal, she is visibly nervous, blushing as she speaks. Kalane is puzzled by her behavior until he recalls his own words from before. He had asked to see her smile once a month. Yuli, overthinking, struggles to decide how to fulfill this request. Should she show her teeth? Curl her lips slightly? The thought of such a small act being so difficult frustrates her. Meanwhile, Varan steps forward, introducing himself as the knight in charge of the escort mission. He makes it clear that both Yuli and Alan are only present as a formality. He reassures Kalane that there is no need to worry, as Varan is one of the most trusted members of their order. Kalane, skeptical, evaluates him using his keen eyesight, but senses nothing unusual. He wonders if he is just being overly cautious. Varan explains that mages usually have a knight assigned to them for protection, and he will personally oversee Kalane's security during the journey. With that settled, Yuli prepares to leave, wishing him a safe trip. As she walks away, she suddenly looks back and awkwardly forces a smile. Kalane watches, realizing that she is simply keeping her promise. Hours later, as the train moves steadily along, Alan starts to doze off. Kalane reflects on the dangers of the Birch assembly, particularly the infamous train ambushes. Every summit assembly brings unexpected attacks, making the journey perilous. This risk is why Birch is feared, despite its prestigious status. Survival depends on choosing the safest route. The original Kalane would have used his underworld connections to buy information about potential ambushes, but since transmigrating, all those ties have been severed. Instead, he took precautions before boarding the train. He learned techniques from a legendary martial artist and prepared defensive enchantments. He even reinforced his and Alan's clothes using a special ability, enhancing their durability. As the train nears its final destination, Decollon begins to relax, thinking he may have chosen the right train after all. His efforts to prepare seem unnecessary. Just as he lets out a sigh of relief, the train begins crossing a precarious bridge. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupts. Before the journey, Sylvia, a talented mage, had been deep in study. A companion, Giltion, had teased her for always having her nose in a book, even on a train. She had been skipping classes, but only because she valued Decollon's lectures more. Giltion had then mentioned the nickname Graveyard of Mages, explaining that every birch summons results in some mages losing their lives. And now, as the explosion shakes the train, it seems that the legend of Birch's deadly journey is once again proving true. 15 years ago, 11 lost his life. For centuries, receiving an invitation to Birch has been a symbol of prestige. Those chosen among the 20 noble families gain an unshakable place in history. However, those who fail to attend the assembly are permanently removed from the register, making way for a new family to take their place. He questions her, asking how one might bring down these powerful houses. She starts to grasp the reality. On the journey to Birch, aspiring mage families see an opportunity to remove the established ones and claim their positions. She struggles to believe it, but he explains that this is why they must hurry. He has received intel that an ambush is planned for one of the later trains, and he needs to be cautious, especially since she is traveling with him. She argues that if such a thing were made public, action would be taken. He insists she must face the harsh truths of their world. He then challenges her to think, among the 12 legacy houses that exist today, has any remained unchanged since the beginning? If blame falls for these deadly events, it will land on an existing noble family. Before the explosion, Alan is still asleep as sticks of dynamite are comically strapped beneath the carriage. Then an eruption shakes the train. Varan instantly reacts while Decollon shifts his focus. A bright blue light shines outside his window as Alan sluggishly wakes, groggily questioning what's happening. He looks out in disbelief. The entire train is now floating. Breathes a sigh of relief. His survival is thanks to his mastery of Astrang martial arts and his last-minute completion of basic telekinesis training before departure. Meanwhile, assassins positioned on top of the train are stunned, whispering among themselves about the unexpected floating. Some suspect it to be the work of a senior professor. Despite their surprise, they remain committed to the mission, knowing a reward awaits. They take advantage of the hole created by the blast and descend into the train, breaching the windows in an organized attack. Decollon, unimpressed, had anticipated their arrival. Using his prepared fragments, he wields telekinesis and eliminates them swiftly, catching Alan off guard. Alan panics, calling out the ambush and asking what to do. Decollon tells him to relax. With a swift move, he knocks Alan unconscious and briefly wonders if he went too far. Turning to Varan, he orders him to move Alan to safety and evacuate any remaining passengers. Without hesitation, Varan climbs up the train to carry out the task. As Decollon watches them leave, he momentarily reflects on Alan's condition. He can't shake the feeling that he might have been too rough. Shrugging it off, he turns back to the remaining enemies, remarking that none of them would be dying of natural causes today. Varan secures Alan and looks back toward the carriage, observing the gaping hole. A heavy silence fills the air. Inside, the train car is littered with fallen bodies. Decollon stands amidst them, sighing. He underestimated the toll this would take. His mana reserves are critically low after dampening the explosion and fending off the attackers. Only 10 units remain. Varan returns, reporting that the passengers are now safe. Decollon nods in approval, ready to leave, but something feels off. Varan's eyes seem different. His aura subtly changed. Initially, Decollon dismisses it as nerves from the attack, but an unmistakable wave of killing intent sweeps over him. Something has shifted. Realization dawns. Varan has been hiding his true nature all along. Diggerlane wonders if he lowered his guard too soon. Varan unsheathes his sword, his expression resolute. He declares that while Diggerlane has survived so far, his fate is sealed. He must die by Varan's blade. Euryclus, remaining calm, asks if this betrayal is on someone's orders. He specifically mentions Yuli. At the mention of her name, Varan erupts in rage, demanding silence. He refuses to tolerate even the suggestion that his liege would stoop to such treachery. She is a true knight, unwavering in her honor. Any insult to her name is unforgivable. For her sake, Diggerlane must die. Diggerlane assesses the situation. Judging by Varan's reaction, it's unlikely Yuli is involved. However, with only 10 mana left, he's at a severe disadvantage. Varan, one of Fraheim's strongest knights, is not an opponent he can easily defeat in this state. Varan formally severs his role as an escort and lunges forward. Diggerlane barely deflects with telekinesis, but the strain is overwhelming. The train shudders beneath them, forcing Diggerlane to cancel his telekinetic hold. As a result, the train begins to plummet. Meanwhile, far away, a man casually offers Sylvia a snack. He presents Birch's specialty, perpetual snow ice cream. Sirio speaks briefly before leaving, and she acknowledges his words, but is already preoccupied with her thoughts. As she stands before a grave, she places flowers down, visiting her mother, Celia. This is something she does often, finding comfort in speaking her heart aloud, even if no one answers. She reflects on her daily struggles, particularly with Diggerlane, who burdens her with an overwhelming amount of work. His classes feel endless, as if nothing else in the world matters. As these thoughts fill her mind, the quiet moment is interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Curious, she peers out from behind a tree, surprised to see Diggerlane himself. Despite his usual imposing presence, he appears different, hunched, lost in thought. She watches in disbelief as he stands before a grave, silent and unmoving. When he turns, she catches sight of something she never expected. Tears. The ever-stoic professor, someone she had only known as strict and unyielding, was mourning. The sight unsettles her, lingering in her mind even after he leaves. Her thoughts are soon interrupted by Giltian's warning about potential ambushes on the later trains. A sense of unease grows within her. Remembering a spell from Diggerlane's lecture, she wonders if now is the time to test it. Using a magic stone as a medium, she channels her mana, normally a blend of red, blue, and green, until it takes form. When she succeeds, she marvels at what she has created. A small bird emerges, a product of her magic. Naming it Swifty, she releases it into the air, forging a connection with it. As it takes flight, she sends it forward, hoping to see through its eyes. Meanwhile, chaos unfolds at the train. Diggerlane regains consciousness, aching from the impact but relieved they hadn't fallen completely. His body, strengthened by Iron Body, will heal in time, but Varen's condition is uncertain. Before he can fully assess the situation, an overwhelming surge of killing intent strikes him. Turning quickly, he barely manages to block an incoming attack from Varan, who remains relentless. Diggerlane attempts to counter, but even a well-placed strike is absorbed by the protective aura surrounding his opponent. Varan's strength is undeniable. Even if he were at full power, victory would be uncertain, and in his current state, the fight feels impossible. Despite this, he refuses to give in. His resolute trait keeps his will unshaken, pushing him forward. As Varan leaps through the air, preparing to strike again, Diggerlane calls upon his telekinesis, forming a barrier just in time. Varan's expression is filled with rage, while Diggerlane remains composed. However, he quickly realizes that his defensive shield has been breached. The thought crosses his mind that if the sword reaches him, everything might reset. Perhaps he would wake up in his office as if none of this had happened. Or maybe this would simply be the end. Blood splatters across the train compartment as Swifty flies overhead. Just before Varan's blade strikes, Diggerlane senses an unusual distortion in space. In the next instant, Varen's wrist is bleeding, and his severed hand is flung behind him. He lets out a painful scream, clutching his wounded arm. Kalain doesn't understand what just happened, but he knows this is his only opening. Using the last bit of his mana, he manipulates his telekinesis to cut the tendon in Varen's foot. The attack causes him to stumble, crashing into the compartment before tumbling out through the hole in the side of the train. Desperate to stop his fall, Varen stabs a dagger into the floor, his trembling arm barely supporting him. Kalain steps toward him, looking down with cold indifference. Varen, gritting his teeth, demands to know what just happened. Even Kalain is unsure, but he questions Varen's hostility, wondering why there is such deep hatred between them when no conflict should exist. Varen responds that a reason isn't necessary. He simply remembers the betrayal against his liege. Kalain questions whether this is truly for Yuli's sake, and if it's even something she would want. He asks what Yuli means to him. Varen only laughs, stating that it's a feeling someone like Kalain would never understand. A memory surfaces. Yuli once helped a distressed woman who thanked her for stepping in before something terrible happened to her child. Yuli brushed off the gratitude, saying that, as a knight, she couldn't ignore a plea for help. In another scene, a young Varan stands accused of wrongdoing. A noblewoman berates him, claiming he attacked her child and trespassed by climbing over a high wall. She sneers, calling him a low-born who resorts to cowardly acts. Yuli intervenes, questioning whether a malnourished child like him could truly scale such a height. When the noblewoman confirms her claim, Yuli offers to take responsibility for him. Varen protests, insisting he did nothing wrong. But then, for the first time, Yuli acknowledges his struggle. She tells him that while fighting back wasn't right, he still deserves guidance. Placing a hand on his arm, she offers to teach him a better way if he chooses to follow her. For the first time in his life, he feels warmth. He hesitates before asking if she would at least give him something to eat. That moment changed everything. He became a knight, though his background made it difficult to fit in. Only Yuli ever stood by him. She led the charge in battles, helped others whenever she could, and never wavered against injustice, even when offered bribes. Day by day, his admiration for her deepened. But Varen knows that his emotions have become a weight on her. His one-sided devotion burdens her, yet he believes his existence is a threat to her future. He is convinced that he must die, because one day he will be the cause of her downfall. Kalain acknowledges that Varan's actions are a result of his own past mistakes, but he refuses to let his story end in destruction. He is determined to correct his wrongs and offers his hand to Varan, promising that he has no ill intentions toward Yuli. He asks Varan to trust him. Varan hesitates, looking down below. As Kalain waits for his answer, something mysterious takes effect again. Kalain clenches his teeth, realizing that Varan will not change his mind. Varan remains firm in his resolve. He is set on killing Kalain. Seeing this, Kalain grips a piece of metal and strikes, warning that Varan's stubbornness will only bring pain to Yuli. Elsewhere, Yuli suddenly feels uneasy. When asked if she's unwell, she brushes it off. Another knight reassures her that Varan is strong and will manage just fine. She smiles slightly, but her thoughts remain troubled. Meanwhile, as Varan plummets to his death, his mind fills with regret and hope that Yuli will find happiness. Above, Swifty soars through the sky, with Sylvia observing through its vision. She sees Kalain, realizing that he fought and survived against the knight who had tried to kill him first. Just then, Sirio calls her inside for an important meeting. She wonders if Kalain will even make it in time. On the train tracks, officials greet a high-ranking woman, Lilia Primian, the vice director of the Security Bureau. She is briefed on the attack and the explosion, which, while unusual, is not unheard of in these times. She inquires about casualties, and is informed that there were no major injuries on their side, but both Kalain and the escort knight Varan are missing. Survivors may provide more details. Alan, one of the survivors, is unconscious from the shock. Another man recounts that a knight had saved him and that the train had floated in mid-air before crashing. He even shows a photo, claiming he captured the unbelievable moment. Lilia is skeptical, but acknowledges the strange circumstances. She suddenly receives a telepathic message informing her that Varan is dead. He had attacked Decalen, but Decalen ultimately survived. Confused about the source of this message, she looks around, but finds no one responsible. Meanwhile, a worker spots someone approaching on the railroad tracks. Decalen himself. Decalen reflects on his survival, admitting that without that strange phenomenon, he wouldn't have stood a chance against Varan, who wasn't even a well-known figure. He wonders what exactly saved him. Lilia formally introduces herself and begins questioning him about the incident. Before answering, Decalen checks the time, 3:30. He calculates that he has 6 hours left. Glancing at the wrecked train tracks, he abruptly asks if this was the only route to Birch. Annoyed, Lilia explains that there are alternative land and sea routes. She attempts to return to her questions, but when she looks up, Decalen has disappeared. Shocked, she wonders how he managed to vanish so quickly. The workers are just as baffled. She finds it unbelievable that he had the power to stop a train from derailing, fend off assassins, and fight Varan, all while using advanced magic. She ponders just how much mana he possesses, and realizes this must be the Decalen that Lockhart spoke of. Meanwhile, at the Birch conference hall, the atmosphere is tense as officials gather. Gilfian notes the time, 9:53, indicating the meeting is about to begin. Sylvia glances around anxiously, noticing Decalane's absence. An elder formally welcomes the attendees before releasing a powerful magical aura. Sylvia recognizes him as Jakenton, the great counselor of Birch, a legendary figure who once had the potential to become an archmage but chose isolation instead. Jakenton begins the roll call, acknowledging prominent figures from noble houses. When he calls Decalane's name, there is no response. He declares that if Decalen does not appear after 3 calls, he will be expelled from the mage houses. Others in the room whisper among themselves, mocking Decalane's lack of talent compared to his predecessors. Sylvia, troubled by their disdain, wonders what kind of life he must have lived to be treated this way. Decalen calls Decalane's name once more, then a second time, as laughter fills the hall. Finally, on the 3rd call, Sylvia resigns herself to the fact that he is about to be expelled, but just then the doors slowly creak open. The room falls silent as Decalen steps inside. Snow clings to his coat as he brushes himself off, slicking back his hair. He strides forward and announces himself with his full title, formally declaring his arrival. If you've watched until the end, comment "villain" to let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.